As much as we like to claim that you can't judge a book by its cover, it doesn't change the fact that a title is often one of the ways that a story grabs our attention when there are so many stories to choose from. If there is one thing that I love about anime, manga, and light novels, it's that they have mastered the art of the long and bizarre title. It takes a special kind of talent to take a premise that initially sounds ridiculous and then translate that into an eye-catching title. Who needs The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime when you have titles like That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime? No matter how I look at it, it's you guys' fault I'm not popular, and the ever so classic, If I don't successfully pick up 420 girls, I am going to die in a lot of different ways. Titles like these are poetry in motion. Which brings me to After Being Rejected, I Shaved and Took in a High School Runaway, or Higehiro for short as it's known in Japanese. This is a show I can say with certainty that I only watched because the title alone grabbed my attention. I didn't know what to think of it. Is this a romance between two people, a comedy, a coming-of-age story? Seriously, what on earth is with this premise? Regardless of whether I'd end up liking the show or not, one thing that was always funny was being asked, "What are you watching?" and offering this title as my response. True to the title's setup, Yoshida is rejected one evening by Goto, a co-worker he has romantic feelings for, but on his way home afterwards, he comes to a streetlight and sees a girl in a high school uniform underneath it. The girl, named Sayu, has run away from home and has nowhere else to stay, so Yoshida decides to give her a temporary roof over her head. Despite her offer to sleep with him in exchange for the hospitality, which she's evidently done many times with other men beforehand, Yoshida refuses. He knows that taking in a runaway like this is against the law, and vows only to keep her around long enough so that she can get back on her feet until she's ready to return home, assuming she doesn't give him reason to kick her out. In time, we begin to learn about why Sayu left home, while other characters in Yoshida's life offer their guidance on how to move forward regarding this whole crazy situation. As uncomfortable as that premise sounds, and it is, it manages to keep itself from flying off the rails thanks to the dynamic between Yoshida and Sayu. Sayu, despite her occasionally obstinate personality and propensity for teasing Yoshida, does not simply abuse his hospitality. Aside from helping prepare meals and clean, she also begins to take a more proactive role in her own life. Small things she does, like talking with him and even going so far as to get herself a part-time job, show a depth to her character that you can't help but feel has gone too undernourished in her life prior. Yoshida, at the opposite end, is more responsible in some ways, but less so in others. While he is certainly a dedicated worker, he's not necessarily the most well-kept or outgoing personality. Though the two of them clash several times in the beginning, they inadvertently reveal to one another what it is in their own lives that have been missing. Them being present together begins each of their own steps towards self-actualization. This gets expressed in their dialogue, which moves away from the sexual banter and brusque rebukes to quieter moments expressing insecurity and vulnerability. As nice as the exchanges between Sayu and Yoshida are, the rest of the cast sadly can't quite measure up to their level of chemistry. Goto herself was a character that I just couldn't figure out, both in terms of her motivations and the actual things she does. It came across more that she was toying with the main duo rather than engaging in a meaningful manner, leaving a sour taste in my mouth most of the time that she was on screen. It doesn't help that most of the cast, aside from Yoshida and Sayu, are essentially put on a bus moving into the ending. They mostly exist to help direct Yoshida's conscience or bring attention to something he may have missed, but it comes at the price of them seemingly not being too relevant in the long run. Their interactions with Sayu don't necessarily feel compelling either. One thing that I asked myself while watching this was, if a different character were saying this line or having this conversation, what would change? Unfortunately, I couldn't come up with a solid enough answer. It's difficult to feel like a character is contributing to the story when their contributions don't feel like they are coming from a genuine place that another character could not offer. There is one exception, and that's Asami. As a co-worker at Sayu's job, she's the other character aside from Yoshida who gets to spend a lot of time with Sayu. Their time together breeds better camaraderie, and I came away with the sense that they were in fact friends rather than casual acquaintances. They joke and they have their share of sentimental moments. Yoshida also needs to be talked about a little more. He's clearly meant to be portrayed as a paragon of virtue and always having the right thing to say. But ironically, that's part of the problem. Though I wouldn't go so far as to call him a Gary Stu, he doesn't seem to have any particular flaws. When other characters point out the flaws in whatever it is that he's doing, they don't feel as substantive as they should be since nothing particularly noteworthy occurs as a result. It's difficult to find a character portrayed as such an honest, hard-working man, a flawed person, since he seems to be so magically persuasive to everyone and they all like him. Additionally, Sayu's motivation for running away in the first place, while certainly understandable, didn't initially translate to the most compelling drama. It relies on a particular trope that, while serious, is one that I've come to find rather tiring. It's not a case of Sayu being stupid or short-sighted, but rather that I've been down this road before with entertainment seemingly a lot recently, so it doesn't hit me in quite the way that the series was intending. This does change, however, as the show enters its final episodes, when Sayu's reasoning begins to make a lot more sense as the context gets filled in. As such, the show managed to keep my interest until the end, and it did round things out decently well. Perhaps the most controversial aspect of this show is how it portrays Sayu visually. I mentioned in the synopsis that Sayu has used her body as a means to get a roof over her head in the past, and this is something the anime tends to wrestle with. The show has two primary ways of presenting Sayu, either as the normal, everyday high school girl, or someone whose body is put more on display. In the case of this show specifically, the latter didn't bother me. Sayu's life experience has shown that more than anything, it is her sexual appeal that manages to get her temporary relief from her life of running away, hence why she spends so much of the early show pursuing sex as her default setting. It has led to reprehensible behavior, but as far as Sayu is concerned, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I didn't read these moments as fan service or titillation. Rather, they came across more as a sad attempt at repeating a cycle of behavior that's been damaging to her. But if Sayu has been in a cycle of bad decisions, it is through her interactions with Yoshida that both she and the show reach their peak. Although I've spent a lot of time in this review with complaints, I do so because the dynamic between the two leads was so nice to see. I loved watching these two characters occupy the screen together, in part because the transition away from where they were at the start to where they move as the story progresses was done well. When they smile at each other or they have their tearful moments, it comes across as wholesome. These are two characters who grow to listen to and comfort one another, along with the occasional barb thrown in.
すごいね。一瞬で溶けちゃうんだもん。
そりゃ砂糖だからな。
もう笑わないでよ。初めて食べたんだから。
そうだったな。悪い。
わかればよろしい。
After being rejected, I Shaved and Took in a High School Runaway was a show that I was not really expecting to like at first, but I was surprised how much I did when it was over, warts and all. The beginning did a good job of creating a playful and slightly antagonistic relationship between Yoshida and Sayu, and the increasing complexity of their situation made for some good drama, even if it got a little heavy-handed. If the total number of characters had been whittled down slightly, or certain plot threads polished or dropped to streamline things overall, I probably would have liked it even more. Even so, it's a decent show. Just as a forewarning, there is one moment where the show does get a little bit visually explicit, so bear that in mind if you choose to see it. I give, After Being Rejected, I Shaved and Took in a High School Runaway, a 7 out of 10.